Discovered my stepmom and stepsister's plot to cut me out of the inheritance, moved out and struggled alone for a year. Now my dad knows the truth. I'm 23M and I've been living with my dad, stepmom, and stepsister for the past 5 years. My mom passed away when I was 16 and my dad remarried about a year later. It was a quick marriage, and before I knew it, I had a new stepmom, Diane, and a stepsister, Megan, who's 2 years younger than me. At first, things were okay. Not great, but okay. Diane tried to play the role of doting mother, but it always felt forced. Megan was polite but distant. I chalked it up to the awkwardness of our new family dynamic and figured things would improve over time. My dad threw himself into his work after my mom died, and that didn't change after he remarried. He's a successful business owner, often away on trips or working late. This left me spending a lot of time with Diane and Megan, which was fine at first. We'd have family dinners when Dad was home, and everything seemed normal on the surface. I went off to college, but stayed local, coming home on weekends and breaks. After graduation, I moved back in while looking for a job in my field. That's when things started to change. Diane became less welcoming, making comments about how I should be out on my own by now. Megan, who had just finished her own degree, moved back in too suddenly. The house felt crowded, and there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. I've been job hunting for a few months now, sending out applications and going on interviews. It's been tough in this economy, but I'm trying. Dad's been supportive, telling me to take my time and find the right fit. Diane, on the other hand, has been increasingly vocal about me needing to move out. Last week, I overheard a conversation that turned my world upside down. I was in my room, door closed, when I heard Diane and Megan talking in the hallway. They must have thought I was out, because they weren't making any effort to keep their voices down. Diane was saying something about how they needed to get rid of him before the will was finalized. Megan agreed, adding that they couldn't risk him getting an equal share. It didn't take a genius to figure out they were talking about me. I sat there frozen as they continued their conversation. They discussed various ways to convince my dad that I needed to move out. Diane suggested cutting off my access to the family car, making it harder for me to get to interviews. Megan proposed accidentally breaking my laptop so I couldn't apply for jobs online. The conversation went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. They talked about how much money they could get if I wasn't in the picture, about trips they could take and things they could buy, all while plotting to sabotage my life. When they finally moved away from my door, I felt sick to my stomach. These were people I'd lived with for years, who had considered family, and here they were plotting against me like I was some kind of obstacle to be removed. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, but it was hard. Every interaction with Diane and Megan felt tainted now. I caught them watching me sometimes with calculating looks in their eyes. It made my skin crawl. I thought about telling my dad, but I hesitated. He seemed happy with Diane, and I didn't want to be the one to shatter that illusion. Plus, I had no proof. It would be my word against theirs, and I wasn't sure whose side he'd take, so I decided to play it cool and start making plans. I reached out to some friends asking if anyone needed a roommate. I doubled down on my job search, applying to positions I'd previously thought were beneath me anything to get out of this house. A week after overhearing the conversation, I got my first break. A friend of a friend was looking for someone to sublease their apartment for 6 months while they studied abroad. The rent was steep, but it was doable. If I dipped into my savings, I jumped at the chance. When I told my dad I was moving out, he seemed surprised, but supportive. Diane and Megan, on the other hand, couldn't hide their glee. They made a show of helping me pack all, while exchanging knowing looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention the day I moved out. I overheard them again. This time they were discussing how to ensure Dad didn't change the will. Now that I was gone, it made me realize that this wasn't just about getting me out of the house. They wanted to cut me out entirely. I've been in my new place for a month now. It's small and not in the best area, but it's mine. I'm still job hunting, picking up gig work, where I can to make ends meet. It's not ideal, but it's better than living in that house with people who see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. Dad calls every few days to check in. He's noticed that I don't come around much anymore, and I can tell he's worried I make excuses about being busy with job hunting and settling into my new place. I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. Not yet. Anyway, I've thought about hiring a lawyer, maybe trying to protect my inheritance, but the truth is, I don't care about the money. What hurts is knowing that the people I thought were my family see me as nothing more than a roadblock to their financial gain. Sometimes late at night I wonder if my mom would be disappointed in me for not fighting harder. But then I remember how she always taught me that family was about love, not blood or legal documents. By that definition, Diane and Megan were never really my family at all. I'm not sure what the future holds. Part of me wants to confront them, to call them out on their scheming. Another part just wants to walk away and never look back. For now I'm focused on building my own life, one that doesn't depend on anyone, goodwill or inheritance. Last week I finally landed a job. It's entry level, and the pay isn't great, but it's a start. I haven't told Dad yet. I'm not sure I want Diane and Megan to know anything about my life anymore. The less they know, the less they can try to sabotage. I've started therapy, the cheapest I could find, trying to work through the anger and betrayal I feel. It's helping slowly. My therapist suggested writing letters to Diane and Megan, not to send, but to get my feelings out. I've filled notebooks with all the things I wish I could say to them. Sometimes I dream about my mom. In these dreams, she's always smiling, telling me she's proud of me. I wake up feeling a mix of comfort and loss. I miss her more than ever now, wishing I had her guidance to navigate this mess. I've thought about reaching out to my mom's side of the family. We lost touch after she died, mostly because it was too painful for all of us. But now I find myself craving that connection. Maybe it's time to rebuild those bridges. As the months have passed, I've settled into a routine: work, home, repeat. It's not exciting, but it's stable. I'm slowly building a life for myself, one that has nothing to do with Diane, Megan, or any inheritance. Dad's birthday is coming up next month. I'm debating whether or not to go to the family dinner. Part of me wants to see him, to celebrate with him, but the thought of sitting across the table from Diane and Megan, pretending everything is fine, makes me feel ill. I've started volunteering at a local youth center on weekends. Many of the kids there come from broken homes or have lost parents. I can relate to them in a way I never could have before all this happened. It's been healing in its own way to help these kids navigate their grief and anger. Sometimes I wonder what Diane and Megan tell people about why I moved out so suddenly. Do they paint me as the ungrateful stepson, stepbrother who abandoned the family? Or do they simply pretend I never existed? I try not to dwell on it, but the thoughts creep in. Sometimes. I've made some new friends at work and through my volunteering. It's nice to have people in my life who know me for who I am, not for my potential inheritance or family connections. These relationships feel more genuine than anything I had with Diane or Megan. The other day, I ran into Megan at the grocery store. It was awkward to say the least. She acted overly friendly, asking about my job and my new place. I kept my answers vague and got out of there as quickly as I could. The encounter left me shaken for days. I've started thinking about my long-term future. Do I want to stay in this city where I might run into Diane or Megan at any time? Or do I want to make a clean break move somewhere new, where no one knows my history? The idea is tempting, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave my dad behind just yet. As my lease nears its end, I'm faced with decisions. Do I renew? Look for a better place? The idea of moving again is exhausting, but so is the thought of staying in this tiny apartment indefinitely. It's just another reminder of how much my life has changed in such a short time. I've started dating recently, nothing serious, just a few casual dates here and there. It's been nice, but also challenging. I find myself hesitant to open up, worried about being hurt or betrayed again. My therapist says this is normal, that it will take time to rebuild my trust in others. Work has been going well. I recently got a small promotion, which has helped ease my financial stress a bit. I'm no longer dipping into my savings every month just to make rent. It's a small victory, but it feels significant. I still haven't told Dad about overhearing Diane and Megan's conversation. Every time I think about bringing it up, I talk myself out of it. What if he doesn't believe me? What if it causes a rift between us? The thought of losing him too is more than I can bear. Sometimes I find myself angry at my mom for dying, for leaving me in this situation. Yet, it's irrational, I know, but the feeling persists. If she were here, none of this would be happening. I'd still have a home, a family, a sense of belonging. I'd try to push these thoughts away, but they linger. I've started learning to cook. It's something I never had to do when living at home, but now it's a necessity. I'm not great at it yet, but I'm improving. There's something satisfying about creating a meal from scratch, about nourishing myself in this tangible way. The holidays are approaching, and with them comes a whole new set of challenges. Do I go home for Christmas? Do I make excuses to stay away? The thought of fake smiles and forced cheer around the dinner table makes my stomach churn, but the idea of spending the holidays alone isn't much better. I've been having trouble sleeping lately. I lie awake at night replaying that overheard conversation in my head. I analyze every interaction I've had with Diane and Megan since they entered my life, wondering if there were signs I missed. It's exhausting, but I can't seem to shut my brain off. I've thought about confronting Diane and Megan directly, letting them know that I heard everything, that I know what they're trying to do. But what would that accomplish? They'd probably just deny it, or twist it somehow, and it might get back to Dad causing more problems than it solves. Some days I'm okay. I go to work. I come home. I live my life. Other days, the weight of everything that's happened crushes me. On those days, it's hard to get out of bed, hard to face a world where the people who were supposed to be my family saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I've started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings each day. It helps somewhat to get it all out on paper. Maybe. Someday, I'll look back on these entries and see how far I've come, for now they serve as a record of this tumultuous time in my life. As I approach the 6-month mark of living on my own, I find myself reflecting on everything that's happened. I'm not the same person I was when I overheard that conversation. I'm stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. I'm learning to stand on my own 2 feet to build a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's goodwill or inheritance. I don't know what the future holds. Will I ever confront Diane and Megan? Will I tell Dad the truth? Will I be able to move past this betrayal and build trusting relationships again? These questions remain unanswered for now. I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on building a life that's entirely my own. It's not easy, and it's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough update 1. It's been a year since I moved out of my dad's house after overhearing my stepmom and stepsister plotting to get rid of me. A lot has changed in that time, and not all of it for the better. I apologize for the delay in updating this post. Life has been incredibly hectic, and I've been struggling to find the time and emotional energy to sit down and write everything out between work, therapy, and just trying to keep my head above water. Updating Reddit wasn't exactly a priority, but I know many of you have been wondering what happened, so I'm finally forcing myself to share this update. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post with advice, support, and kind words. Your messages meant more to me than you could know, especially during those first few difficult months on my own. I tried to read every comment, even if I didn't have the capacity to respond to them all. Your support has been a bright spot in an otherwise dark time, and I'm grateful for this community. So now on to the update. I'm still at the same job I landed shortly after moving out. The work is okay, but the pay is barely enough to cover my expenses. I've been looking for something better, but the job market is tough. Every rejection email feels like a personal failure, a reminder that I'm still struggling to get my life on track. My relationship with my dad has become strained. I've been avoiding family gatherings and making excuses not to visit. He's noticed, of course. He calls more frequently now, asking if everything's okay. I hate lying to him, but I can't bring myself to tell him the truth about why I left. The few times I've seen him, he's looked worried and tired. I wonder if Diane and Megan are causing him stress, or if it's just concern for me. I did end up going to his birthday dinner a few months back. It was as uncomfortable as I'd feared. Diane and Megan were all smiles and false cheer, asking about my job and my apartment with saccharine concern. I could see the calculation behind their eyes, probably wondering if I was struggling enough to give up any claim to an inheritance I left as soon as I could, making an excuse about an early meeting the next day. The holidays were rough. I told Dad I couldn't make it home for Christmas, claiming I had to work. In reality, I spent the day alone in my apartment eating microwave turkey dinner and watching old movies. It was depressing, but still better than pretending to be a happy family with Diane and Megan. I've been thinking more and more about telling Dad the truth, but every time I consider it, I talk myself out of it. What if he doesn't believe me? What if it causes a rift between us? Or worse, what if he does believe me but chooses to stay with Diane anyway? I'm not sure I could handle that kind of rejection. My therapy sessions have been helpful, but progress is slow. I'm still working through the anger and betrayal I feel. My therapist says it's normal that healing takes time, but some days it feels like I'll never get past this. I've had a few more run-ins with Megan around town. Each time she acts like everything's normal, like we're still one big happy family. It makes my skin crawl. I've taken to avoiding certain stores and restaurants just to minimize the chance of seeing her or Diane. The volunteer work at the youth center has been a bright spot. I've connected with some of the kids there, particularly a teenager named Alex, who lost his mom last year. Helping him navigate his grief has been healing for me too. In a way, it's a reminder that there's still good in the world, still connections to be made. I've tried dating a few times over the past year, but it hasn't gone well. I find myself struggling to open up, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. My last date ended with the girl telling me I had too much baggage. She's probably right. My lease is up next month, and I'm not sure what to do. The idea of moving is exhausting, but I'm also tired of this tiny apartment with its noisy neighbors and temperamental heating. I've been looking at places in other parts of town, maybe even in the next city over. A fresh start is tempting. I did end up reaching out to my mom's sister, my Aunt Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Mom's funeral. It was awkward at first, but as we talked, it felt like reconnecting with a part of myself I'd lost. She invited me to visit her family for a weekend. I'm considering it, though the idea of explaining everything that's happened is daunting. Work has been more stressful lately. There have been rumors of layoffs, and as one of the newer employees, I'm worried I'll be on the chopping block. The thought of losing my job terrifies me. I don't have much savings left, and I'm not sure how long I could stay afloat without an income. I've started having nightmares about being homeless, about having to go back to Dad's house and face Diane and Megan. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing. It takes hours to calm down enough to sleep again. My birthday came and went without much fanfare. Dad called, of course, and a few friends took me out for drinks, but it was hard not to compare it to birthdays past, when Mom was alive, and we'd have big family celebrations. The contrast was stark and depressing. I've been thinking about my mom a lot lately. I wonder what she'd think of all this, how she'd advise me to handle it. Sometimes I talk to her photo, telling her everything that's happened. It's childish, maybe, but it helps. The anger I feel towards Diane and Megan hasn't lessened much over the past year. If anything, it's intensified. I find myself imagining confronting them, telling them I know everything in my daydreams. They break down and confess, and Dad kicks them out. But I know that's just fantasy. I've started looking into legal options, just in case. I met with a lawyer who specializes in estate law. He said that without proof, there's not much I can do to protect any potential inheritance. He suggested talking to my dad about setting up a trust, but that would mean telling him everything. I'm not ready for that yet. My health has started to suffer from all the stress. I've lost weight, and I'm constantly tired. My doctor says my blood pressure is elevated, and I need to find ways to relax. Easier said than done. I've thought about moving away completely, starting fresh in a new city where there's no chance of running into Diane or Megan, but the thought of leaving Dad behind, of potentially never seeing him again is too painful to consider seriously. There have been moments of light in all this darkness. I've made a few good friends at work and through my volunteering. They don't know the full story, but they've been supportive in their own ways. It's nice to have people in my life who like me for who I am, not for any potential inheritance. I've picked up some new hobbies to fill my time and take my mind off things. I've been learning to play guitar, something I always wanted to do, but never had the time for before. I'm not very good yet, but the process of learning is satisfying. I've also started running. At first, it was just a way to get out of my apartment and clear my head, but I've found that I enjoy it. There's something freeing about pushing my body to its limits, leaving all my worries behind for a little while. As the 1-year mark of my move-out approached, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. It felt like I should have made more progress. Should be in a better place by now? My therapist says I'm being too hard on myself, that healing isn't linear. I'm trying to believe her. I did end up visiting Aunt Sarah and her family. It was nice to be around people who knew my mom, who could share stories about her that I'd never heard for a weekend. I felt like I belonged somewhere again. But coming back to my empty apartment afterward was harder than I expected. The visit also stirred up some complicated feelings. Aunt Sarah asked about Dad, about how he was doing with his new wife. I found myself unable to answer, choking on the words she noticed, of course, and gently probed for more information. I ended up telling her everything. Aunt Sarah was furious on my behalf. She wanted to call Dad immediately to confront Diane and Megan herself. I had to talk her down, explain why I hadn't told him yet. She didn't agree with my decision, but she respected it. Before I left, she made me promise to keep in touch to let her know if I needed anything. Knowing that someone from my mom's side of the family is in my corner has been comforting. Aunt Sarah calls regularly now, checking in on me. She's even offered to let me stay with her family if things get too tough financially. I'm not ready to take her up on that yet, but it's nice to know the option is there. As for Dad, things came to a head last week. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, worry etched on his face. He said he couldn't stand the distance between us anymore, that he needed to know what was going on. I tried to deflect, to make excuses, but he wasn't having it. We ended up talking for hours. I told him everything, overhearing Diane and Megan's conversation, my fears about the inheritance, why I'd been avoiding family gatherings. It all came pouring out in a rush of emotion I couldn't control. Dad listened silently, his face growing more grave with each word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he apologized. He said he had no idea any of this was happening, that he'd been blind to what was going on in his own home. He didn't outright say he believed me, but he didn't dismiss my concerns either. He promised to look into things, to pay closer attention to Diane and Megan's behavior. He also said he'd talked to his lawyer about protecting my inheritance, regardless of what happened with his marriage. I felt relieved after our talk, like a weight had been lifted, but I also felt guilty for potentially disrupting his life, his marriage. Dad assured me that I'd done the right thing by telling him that he needed to know, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. It's been a week since that conversation, and I haven't heard much from Dad. He texted to say he was looking into things and would be in touch soon. I'm trying not to read too much into the silence, but it's hard not to worry. Diane called me yesterday, her voice syrupy sweet. As she invited me to Sunday dinner, I declined, making an excuse about work. I wonder if she knows that Dad and I talked, if she's trying to do damage control. The thought makes me feel slightly nauseous. As I approach the start of my second year on my own, I find myself at a crossroads. Do I stay here close to Dad, but also to Diane and Megan? Do I take Aunt Sarah up on her offer and move closer to my mom's family? Do I strike out on my own, completely move to a new city and start fresh? I don't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have options. The future is uncertain, but it doesn't feel as bleak as it did a year ago. I'm not okay, not really, but I think I might be getting there for now. I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm focusing on my job, my volunteering, my new hobbies. I'm working on building a life that's entirely my own, one that doesn't depend on anyone else's goodwill or inheritance. It's not easy, and it's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The conversation with Dad has stirred up a lot of old feelings. I find myself thinking about Mom more than ever, wondering what she would make of all this. Would she be proud of me for standing on my own, disappointed that I didn't fight harder? I'll never know, and that uncertainty gnaws at me. I've been having trouble sleeping again. Every time my phone rings, I jump, wondering if it's Dad with news. The waiting is excruciating. I've thrown myself into work and my hobbies, anything to keep my mind occupied, but in the quiet moments, the worry creeps back in. Update 2, Megan tried to friend me on social media last week. I ignored the request, but it left me feeling unsettled. Is she trying to keep tabs on me, or is it just another attempt to maintain the facade of a happy family? Either way, I want no part of it. I've been thinking about the future a lot lately. Before all this happened, I had vague plans of maybe going to grad school someday, of advancing in a career. Now, I feel stuck in survival mode, just trying to keep my head above water. I wonder if I'll ever be able to think about the future with hope again, instead of anxiety. The lease on my apartment is up next week. After much thinking, I've decided to move not far, just to a slightly better apartment in a different part of town. It's a small step, but it feels significant, like I'm choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in place. I had dinner with Alex from the youth center last night. He's heading off to college soon, and he wanted to thank me for all the support I've given him. Over the past year, seeing how far he's come, how he's working through his grief, and moving forward with his life, gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe I can do the same. As I pack up my apartment, I find myself taking stock of my life. A year ago, I left my family home with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Now, I have a job, an apartment, friends. It's not much, but it's something I've built for myself. There's a certain pride in that, mixed with the lingering pain and uncertainty. I'm still waiting to hear from Dad about what he's found out. The silence is deafening, but I'm trying to be patient. Whatever happens, I know I'll face it. I'm stronger now than I was a year ago. I've survived betrayal, loneliness, and uncertainty. I can survive whatever comes next. For now, I'm focusing on my move, on setting up my new apartment, on making it feel like home, on continuing to build a life that's mine, regardless of what happens with Dad, Diane, and Megan. It's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's the one I'm living, and for today, that has to be enough. Final update. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and a lot has happened. I'm not sure where to begin, but I guess I'll start with the biggest news. Dad finally made his decision after our talk, where I told him everything about overhearing Diane and Megan's plans. Dad spent weeks investigating. He hired a private investigator, went through financial records, and even set up some kind of sting operation that he won't give me the details of. But in the end, he uncovered enough evidence to confirm everything I'd told him, and then some. It turns out Diane and Megan had been siphoning money from Dad's accounts for years. They'd been making small withdrawals, nothing big enough to raise suspicion, but it added up to a significant amount over time. They'd also been pressuring Dad to change his will, using emotional manipulation tactics that the PI documented. When Dad confronted them with the evidence, all hell broke loose. Diane tried to deny everything at first, then tried to blame it all on Megan. Megan broke down and confessed to everything, throwing Diane under the bus in the process. It was a mess. Long story short, Dad filed for divorce. He's also pressing charges for the financial fraud. Diane and Megan have moved out, and last I heard, they were staying with Diane's sister in another state. I have mixed feelings about all of this. On one hand, I feel vindicated. Everything I feared, everything I overheard, it was all true. On the other hand, I hate seeing Dad go through this pain. He loved Diane, or at least he thought he did. Finding out it was all a lie has been devastating for him. Dad and I have been talking more now. He's apologized countless times for not seeing what was happening, for not believing me sooner. I've forgiven him, but our relationship is still strained. We're working on it. Though we've started having weekly dinners together, just the two of us. It's awkward sometimes, but it's a start. As for me, I'm still in my new apartment. The move was good for me. I think it feels like a fresh start, a place that's truly mine, without any connections to Diane or Megan. I've been slowly furnishing it, making it feel like home. It's not much, but it's mine, and that means work has been going better. The layoffs I was worried about didn't end up happening, and I even got a small raise. It's not much, but it's enough that I'm not living paycheck to paycheck anymore. I've started putting a little bit away in savings each month. It's not much, but it's a start. Therapy is ongoing. My therapist says I'm making progress, even if it doesn't always feel like it. The anger and betrayal are still there, but they're not as all-consuming as they want. I'm learning to live with what happened, to not let it define me. I've been spending more time with my mom's side of the family. Aunt Sarah has been a godsend through all of this. She's become a sort of surrogate mother figure, always there with advice or just a listening ear when I need it. I've been visiting her family more often, getting to know my cousins again. It's nice to feel like I have a family again, even if it's not the one I grew up with. Dating is still complicated. I've been on a few dates, but nothing serious. I'm still working on trusting people, on opening up. My therapist says this is normal, that it will take time. I'm trying to be patient with myself. One unexpected development is that I've started writing nothing fancy. Just journaling at first, but lately I've been thinking about turning my experiences into a book, maybe a memoir, or maybe fictionalized. I'm not sure yet, but writing has been cathartic, a way to process everything that's happened. Dad and I had a long talk last week about the inheritance issue. He set up a trust for me, separate from his personal assets. He says he wants to make sure I'm taken care of, no matter what happens. I tried to tell him it wasn't necessary, that I don't care about the money, but he insisted. I think it's his way of trying to make amends. Dad's been talking about selling the house. Too many bad memories. He says part of me is sad about it. It was my childhood home, after all, but I understand his need for a fresh start. We've been looking at smaller places together. He jokes about becoming roommates, but I think we both know we need our own spaces. I ran into one of Megan's friends at the grocery store last week. She glared at me, muttered something about me ruining Megan's life. I wanted to yell, to defend myself. Instead, I just walked away. Their opinions don't matter anymore. I know the truth, and that's enough. Work has been a good distraction. Through all of this, I've thrown myself into my job, taking on extra projects whenever I can. My boss has noticed. She's hinted at a possible promotion in the near future. It's nice to feel valued, to know that my hard work is paying off. Dad and I are planning a trip together, nothing fancy, just a weekend at a nearby lake. We used to go camping there when I was a kid, before Mom got sick. It feels like a step towards rebuilding our relationship, towards creating new memories to replace the painful ones. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, wondering what she would think of everything that's happened. I miss her more than ever. Aunt Sarah gave me a box of Mom's old things last time I visited. Photos, letters, even some of her jewelry. Going through it was emotional, but healing too. It's nice to have these tangible connections to her. I've started reaching out to old friends, people I lost touch with when everything went down with Diane and Megan. Some have been receptive, others not so much, but it feels good to be rebuilding my support network, to have people in my life who knew me before all this happened. The legal proceedings against Diane and Megan are ongoing. Dad's lawyer keeps us updated, but I try not to focus on it too much. They'll face consequences for their actions, but I don't want their fate to control my life anymore. I've been thinking about the future more lately, not just surviving day to day, but actually planning ahead. I'm considering going back to school, maybe for a master's degree. It's a big step, but for the first time in a long time, I feel capable of taking it. There are still bad days, but the good days are starting to outnumber the bad ones. I'm not okay. Not yet, but I'm getting there. I'm building a life for myself, one that's not defined by what Diane and Megan tried to do to me. It's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what the future holds. To everyone who's followed my story, who's offered support and advice along the way, thank you. Your kindness has meant more than you know. This will be my final update. It's time for me to close this chapter of my life and focus on writing the next one. Wish me luck.